On the UConn Sports Nation hotline is Dave Matter of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch to help preview Saturday's matchup between UConn and Missouri. Dave, certainly appreciate your time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So Mizzou is 2-5 on the year. They opened up with a 72-point performance against Missouri State, but then have struggled since against Power 5 competition. What's been the story of 2017 to this point for the Tigers?
Early on it was definitely their offense wasn't living up to the expectations everybody had for this team going into the season. Defensively, Missouri really struggled last year, and I think most expected that to not be resolved completely this season, and it certainly has not by any means. But the surprise was how poorly they were playing offensively when probably the first month of the season or so. They've since played better on that side of the ball, even not just last week's win over Idaho, but a week before at Georgia. They hit Georgia's defense that nobody else has done this year. So that side of the ball feels pretty confident about things. But otherwise, they just give up way too many points. They had breakdowns in special teams pretty much throughout the year, other than the game last week. They've been a mess, and they've not made the kind of progress from top to bottom like you kind of expect in a coach's second year.
Now, offensively, despite some of the struggles you mentioned, they are averaging 70 points per game against non-Power 5 teams. Only 2 games, small sample size, but still. Despite the record, quarterback Drew Lock is having a great year, 23 touchdowns, and leads the nation in yards per completion at just under 17. What are his assets at the position, and should we consider him one of the better quarterback prospects in all of college football as he heads to Connecticut this weekend?
He's got a really strong arm, and that's really kind of the staple of their offense is the deep ball. He's got a really kind of uncanny ability, and it goes back to his receivers too, his outside receivers, to complete 50-yard passes or even longer, which he's done a few times this year. He struggles a little bit more in the intermediate to kind of shorter throws. He's made a few bad decisions with the ball on some of the short throws that have led to interceptions. But overall, he's shown pretty good progress from last year. This is his third year starting for the most part, and this is his second year in Josh Heupel's offense. So he's a pretty, experienced quarterback at this point. I still think they'd like to see his completion percentage go up. He's always been kind of in the 50s, but he does throw so many deep balls, and those passes are harder to complete. If you hit 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4, it's worth a couple misses earlier. So he's still kind of figuring things out at this level, but he's definitely been able to play really well against kind of lower-level Group of 5 or FCS teams. He struggled a little bit more against Power 5 teams, although his game against Georgia this year was, again, as well as any quarterbacks played against Georgia.
You mentioned some of the receivers. 2 guys on the outside stand at 6'3", and Jamon Moore and Emmanuel Hall. Hall leads the nation coming in and yards per catch at just over 28, which explosive plays in the passing game is really something the Huskies defense has struggled with. Obviously, UConn's dead last against the pass. And even despite some improvement over the last couple of weeks by what is a secondary that is very young, do you see this being a major, the battle in the passing game as being a major advantage for Missouri?
Yeah, and it is most weeks against most teams. So this is something I think they'll really try to exploit. I don't think it'll look any different from last week when they were, really focused on trying to stretch Idaho's defense vertically, and that's what works best for this defense or this offense, even against really good defenses. So I'd expect more of the same this week against UConn.
Then at running back, sticking with offense, Ish Witter and freshman Larry Roundtree are going to take over for Demaria Crockett. I know he missed last week. UConn did see Witter in the matchup 2 years ago. He had 17 carries in that game. But what do each bring to the running game? And should they be a focal point on Saturday, or are we going to see more pass than run?
I think you'll see more pass than run, but they do try to keep things balanced. They use those running backs to set up the play-action pass game. So that they will have a role. Witter is a guy he's not super explosive. He's not the biggest back, but he gets the job done. He's pretty good north-south runner. He's a really good blocker in pass protection, which is necessary in this offense. Roundtree he's a true freshman. He hasn't gotten a lot of carries until lately. He's a real powerful back, 210 pounds. Not the biggest guy. He's much bigger than Witter, but probably not as stout as Crockett. But he's shown some real flashes lately, and I expect his role to continue to expand. They really like his future as a guy who's going to have to share some time back there with Crockett next year probably, but they really do like his upside.
I'm talking with Dave Matter, who's here to preview Saturday's matchup with Missouri. Kickoff is set for 6:30, and for those that can't make it to the Rent, it's going to be broadcast on CBS Sports Network. So these two teams met in Columbia 2 seasons ago, a 9-6 final that was really littered with special teams errors, mistakes, fake field goals. But it seems both have different identities in this matchup, particularly on offense. You mentioned him earlier, but what has former OU quarterback and current offensive coordinator Josh Heupel brought to this offense over the last 2 years?
Well, it's a real up-tempo no-huddle. I know everybody's no-huddle for the most part these days, but they really try to go fast. They will stretch their formations from sideline to sideline. You will see the wideouts practically lined up just outside of or just off of the sideline, and they do that to kind of create mismatches and create running lanes for the running backs. They use a tight end a lot. They're on the field constantly, whether they're in the backfield or split wide or lined up on the line of scrimmage. And they really have found something in a redshirt freshman tight end, Albert Okwuegbunam. His name's a little tough to pronounce, but he's really been a weapon for them, especially in the red zone lately. So they have weapons all over the place. I know I was listening to Randy Edsall's press conference earlier this week. It's hard to focus on just one guy because they've got so many other options, whether it's a slot receiver, Jonathan Johnson, who's had big games this year, or the 2 outside guys. That's really what this offense, the way they're playing right now is how they were really expected to be playing at the beginning of the year, when Locke can just kind of sit back there and find the best matchup out there. And, any one of a number of guys could have 100 yards on a given day. So that's kind of what this thing is designed to look like.
Now, has Heupel's arrival really helped the development of Locke? Because we did see Locke in the UConn matchup 2 years ago. He seems like he's a completely different player. I know he was a freshman then, but has certainly fully developed since that time.
Yeah, a lot so. He did not expect to play his freshman year, but they started giving him a few snaps here and there. He got in for 2 series at UConn. He talked about the other day how he got a second half series, which he was not expecting at all, and he got sacked and kind of put the game at risk there. But Heupel came in and completely changed everything they were doing offensively. And even though he had, I think, 8 starts his freshman year, they almost considered him more of a first-time starter last season because the offense had changed so much. And, Heupel's done this for a long time. He was he won a national championship as a quarterback at Oklahoma, and then he coached some great quarterbacks at Oklahoma over time. So he's a pretty experienced quarterback coach and coordinator for still being a fairly young guy. And he definitely changed this offense, changed the identity, and I think he's done a pretty good job with Locke through 2 years now.
Earlier in the show, I played a portion of head coach Barry Odom's I think it was a very passionate speech following, I think it was the loss to Auburn. Was that a key turning point to the season, do you think, for Mizzou? And because it seems they've played quite a bit better since that time. And what's the overall assessment that Odom's doing in Columbia?
Well, people aren't happy at all. I mean, he inherited a program that had a 5-win season in Gary Pinkel's last year, but I don't think the sense was that this program was on some steep decline. They just won the SEC East the 2 previous seasons, and then they go in only 4 games last year, and this year you start off 1-5. It looks pretty grim. So, he is the fans definitely have him on a hot seat. I don't know how hot it is with Missouri's athletic director, but people are pretty much running out of patience here because they have seen this program get to a level where they not only expect to go to bowl games, but go to pretty good ones. And it's really taken a step backwards here. Yeah, that rant he had after Auburn, it was very much planned. It's a little strange because he kind of redefined, where the program is right now. He was talking about going to a bowl game when he got the job, and that was definitely the goal going into the season. And then after that game, it kind of changed to, well, this is a rebuild situation. Turnaround is what he called it. And I don't think that convinced a lot of people. I think, if anything, he's looking for some patience here, and he really believes that he'll get this thing turned around, but maybe not as fast as most people expected, or even he expected a year ago and then at the beginning of this year. So there's still a lot to figure out. They've got some really winnable games here down the stretch, but they have zero margin for error at this point.
I don't know the last time Missouri came up to the Northeast for a college football game, but I don't think it's been in recent time. Has travel been a topic of conversation this week, and do you expect to see any Missouri fans making the trip up?
I don't think they'll have a lot there. Missouri travels pretty well to the Southeastern Conference locations, whether they're going to LSU last year or, Nashville every other year, or, this year they had a decent amount at Georgia. But I don't know about this trip unless it's people that have some ties up in the Northeast. I can't think. I've been covering this team forever. I can't think of the last time played up in that area at all. Missouri did. So it's going to be a little bit different. They're not talking about travel much. Missouri is in the East Division of the SEC, but they're the farthest team west. So they're used to long trips to South Carolina and Florida every other year. So they haven't really talked much about travel this week.
And then finally, how do you see Saturday playing out?
I think Missouri's offense is found its identity, it's found its gear, and I don't think they'll struggle to score points this week. I thought Missouri's defense last week made some progress, though you just can't read too much into a game against Idaho. It's a really bad team right now. So I think Missouri will score a bunch of points again, and I don't think they'll win comfortably, but it's possible. If last week was an indication of where they are right now, then I think they can win this game by a couple touchdowns. But you just never know with a team that has a pretty shaky defense, because you can be so inconsistent on that side of the ball. And we saw Missouri State score 43 points on this defense earlier this year, and that's a bad FCS team. So there's no guarantees when it comes to this defense.
Dave, I certainly appreciate your time. And before you head out, maybe give the listeners an idea of where they can find you online.
All of our coverage is at stltoday.com. You can find our Mizzou coach there. And then I'm on Twitter at _Matter, Matter.